Hey, how's it going, everyone? Thank you for joining me on a new episode of the Music Review Podcast. My name's Josh, and thanks for joining me today on a new album review. Today's album is going to be As Long As You Are by Future Islands. Released on October 9th, 2020. It's been out a couple weeks now, and I wanted to get around to reviewing this album, so here we are. This is a band that I've been listening to a few years now, and I guess I was skeptical of reviewing it mainly because it fell in line with a lot of other releases that I'm probably not going to get around to review, such as Touche Amore or the latest Sylvanesso album. But this one kind of stood out, not in like a grandiose, like very positive manner. It just stood out to me as something more interesting to review. So here we are. And just before we get started, I want to let everyone know there's a new episode of Best or Worst Track of the Week covering the week of October 31st. If you somehow missed it or you still need to stream it, go ahead and check it out on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, whatever you'd like to listen on. It was a bit of a, I guess, lackluster week. One of those where I kind of just, the general consensus for me was just, it was all pretty bad. But overall, there's some interesting tracks from, Young Blue on there, Larry, the internet, social media personality, also some country, Kenny Chesney, Lady A. If you're interested in my thoughts on that, check it out. Also, the previous album review I released was Apollonio by Omar Apollo. Thought that was a pretty cool album by the young bedroom pop artist. If you want to check out that review or that album, go ahead. But nonetheless, let's go ahead and start this review. So for those of you who are not familiar with Future Islands, or you are familiar with Future Islands, I'll go ahead and do a little bit of a background. They're an American synth pop band from Baltimore, Maryland. They are also a quartet, and they're an interesting band overall because they do have members that form this sort of synth pop, indie pop sort of genre, but they go about it like using live instrumentation for the most part. Bass guitar is a huge part in a lot of their tracks. So as opposed to like other synth pop or indie pop bands like Churches, Beach House, or even Purity Ring, they're not really so focused on like the electronic producer sort of out of the laptop sort of thing. This is more of a band with like instrumental performance roots. I came to find them in my college days sometime around 2014 or 15, especially around the time when Seasons Waiting on You came out around that time. And around that time, indie was just sort of still in its boom. Imagine Dragons were getting obnoxiously big around that time. This is post Torches for Foster the People. I think around that time they're on their sophomore album. Bands like Lumineers were garnering attention. Alt J was somehow in the public spotlight in the United States. So it kind of made sense that bands like Future Islands were getting talked about and big. And especially for them, a lot of their credit could be attributed to the indie blogosphere and festival culture of the 2010s. I remember even catching a part of their set at a festival I attended in 2015 too. And I was just kind of very lukewarm on the band. I've never disliked their music, but I've also never been a fanatic. So checking out them live was pretty cool as well. And if I had to expand on what makes Future Islands so captivating, I'd say it can mainly come from their frontman, Sam Herring. He brings a pretty interesting dynamic to the band, both musically and aesthetically. The man's voice is very distinguishable and unique with its unorthodox vocal tone and inflections that he throws in. He's also known for being quite that dynamic and enthusiastic performer and having a really I guess, top-notch stage presence in terms of, like, what you find in the genre. I've also was very surprised to find out that the band's origins go back as far as 2005, when the founding members were just coming off of a sort of defunct project. And it's it's quite a bit of a Cinderella story with Future Islands. They really didn't come into much prominence until their fourth album in 2014. Singles that included the talked about single here, Seasons, which obviously bolstered their career and gave them critical acclaim. It was the best song that Pitchfork gave of that year. And then also there was a bit of an anomaly with the band also having the most popular late night show performance on the internet from David Letterman's late night show. It seemed like it kind of just fell into place for them. The band seemed to also have, a few rough years among their first few releases. It seems like it's just a nice thing that the band became one of the most prominent indie pop or synth pop acts of the 2010s and maybe beyond. Their fame has yet to, I guess, cap out. They're still as relevant as they were a few years ago. So as I do on most album reviews, I went back to their most recent release in 2017 prior to As Long As You Are coming out. The name of the album was titled The Far Field. I found that the album featured much of their typical sound with the agile bass line and at the forefront for most songs, some colorful synths filling in the rest, while the vocals give most of the tracks some added life. Tracks like Ran and North Star, in my opinion, were nice highlights on this album. The latter features a catchy chorus and some nice auxiliary percussion that really give the track a nice flavor. That track in particular is at least energetic for most of its runtime, if not all. That's something that I found not to be the case on several tracks off of As Long As You Are. Other tracks like Ancient Water were a nice track to revisit. I remember that track being a single off the album that I hadn't listened to in some time. The track features some vibrant synth tones that coat the track for its entirety that I appreciate. There were some slow burners that were a bit from left field, like Candles 2, but overall, I felt that The Far Field was a more captivating album than what we got here on As Long As You Are. There's just some more overall energy in the performances in many areas as opposed to As Long As You Are. And for instance, Day Glow Fire has more of an interesting drum track than anywhere I found on As Long As You Are as well. Just something minute as that made a difference on this new album as opposed to their previous release. So starting from Glada, the opening track, here you're immediately greeted with some soft and smooth synth textures. The track does have a sense of comatose here. You immediately get that sense. Vocals do come out with the classic rasp and darkness of the frontman Herring, and immediately the track does give off some light beach house vibes as well instrumentally. In my opinion, the first highlight doesn't come until the track For Sure. This is one of the lead singles off of this album. This track is definitely more upbeat and colorful in comparison to the previous track. There's some chirping guitar embellishments that are pretty nice touch to the track. There's a bass line that's a little bit more pronounced and bouncy. A nice anticipation is created before the chorus as well. And the track just has an overall sense of groove. The rhythmic section on this track does a great job at keeping the energy for the duration. It doesn't really dim out or anything. And there's some nice transitions in and out of the chorus and the verses. The next track, actually, Born in a War, is not too bad either. I didn't really find it to be that much of a highlight, but the track is structured around this boomy and prominent bass groove for much of the track. It's probably one of the more memorable bass moments on this album. The textures the synths create on this track as well, especially on the chorus, really paint the song for what it is. There's not much guitar heard here as well either. It's a very synthy track. And this track did grow on me a little bit, though. I liked it more the second time and on. The track after this, I Knew You, is much more of a down-tempo track. Here there's an atmosphere created in the intro that reminds me of something that could have been on Washed Out's latest album. I like the transition to the choruses here as well. It's done very smoothly, and it also sounds different in comparison to what's been presented thus far on the album. This track just has a hint of a little bit more sensitivity overall, and the track also presents some nice guitar grooves implemented throughout the track, like in the second verse, and the track just feels patient and everything just feels so well timed. It's my favorite track thus far, and I will say the comatose nature does present itself here though. And I'd say this kind of just starts a trend going into the next track, City's Face. This is an interesting 80s flavored track that I didn't really find to be much of a highlight, but it does suffer from, a comatose, I guess, feel. The track after that, Waking, though, I felt was an improvement. This track is definitely a return to form. There's a prominent and bouncy bass line here again. Reminds me a bit of the closing track off of Everything's latest album as well for some reason. And the track just seems to build up for quite a long time to something. But then we kind of just get a chorus that feels a little underwhelming or undistinguishable to the rest of the track. So it just feels like it doesn't really build up to much as the track goes on. I did like the track after that, The Painter. I like the change in colors here with the bass tone. The dryness gives it an interesting touch. And the synth embellishments here work as well. The track has a bit of a mechanical and rigid flavor to it, but it's at least more interesting than a lot of the other things we've heard thus far. Again, quirky synth embellishments all throughout the track that save it. The track does feel a bit elongated and unenergetic as it runs its course, but the track is overall interesting, and I like it more than the previous track. Another highlight we find after The Painter is Plastic Beach. Here I love the guitar riff that we're immediately greeted with at the beginning. To me, it reminds me of a Killer's track. And the airy and light synths here are pretty as well. The track picks up momentum when the drum track kicks in too, so there's some nice development. I love the added textures that are added on as the track develops over too. It kind of just becomes louder and heavier, but it also shows some nice contrast when those elements drop out and we're given some dynamics in the track. Probably my favorite build-up happens thus far on this album, on this track, with the ending climactic section that really hits the mark. But I'd say after this track, the album unfortunately hits a bit of a lull. The track Moonlight I really didn't find to be that captivating or really interesting. The track after that, Thrill, was a bit of a sensitive track, and you can really hear the vocal performance with it being the most patient thus far on the album. And I'd say this is probably the best vocal performance we get thus far, but the rest of the track's elements really don't save it because it just feels so comatose again. So unfortunately, a great opportunity I feel was missed here on this track. And then we're already towards the last track on Hit the Coast, which I found to be, I guess, a slight improvement. The track opens up with some bright synth effects and this rumbling bass line, and it also kind of reminds me of a Killer's track again, or even an Arcade Fire one. The rhythmic section here just provides a great groove. There's some pretty synth counter melodies in the chorus that make the song a little bit brighter. The way the vocals are handled here, though, especially with the Hit the Coast line on the hook, it can sound a bit clumsy and awkward, and I'd say that's probably the downfall of this track. This track really had some potential here, and there's some great moments, but maybe it just felt a little underdeveloped in my opinion. And I'd say by the time we're at the end of this album, this album just gives me a mixed bag of things. There's some things that I really enjoyed, but there's some things that I felt were, like I said, underdeveloped, slow, comatose, some issue similar to the issues I had on the latest Washed Out album. I felt like it could have maybe even been a little bit more concise in some areas, like if they were going for a certain effect overall in the album. I feel like they really could have accomplished that a little bit better with, I guess, leaving out the slow burners, or if they were going for just slow burners, make the whole album just slow burners, but poured a little bit more thought into it at moments. But overall, I didn't think the album was bad. I'm just kind of indifferent. I'd say it's a 5 out of 10. If you like the band Future Islands, definitely give this album a listen. You're probably going to find some things that you really enjoy. If you're a fan of indie pop or synth pop, this might not be your cup of tea. If you're more into like the glitzy, glamorous production of some bands that are out there, such as like Churches or something. But who knows? If you just like indie music in general, you probably will find something that you'll enjoy from this album. But if you stuck around with me to the end of this episode, thanks for listening. I'm the music reviewer. I'll be reviewing some more things soon. Tune in weekly for best and worst track of the week if you're enjoying that show. If you have any feedback on YouTube, like and subscribe if you like it. If not, leave me some positive or negative criticism. But anyways, yeah, take care of yourselves, and I'll be reviewing more music soon.